we actually have some mostly good news for once to talk about here in the food space. And it really kind of connects with one of the in vogue ideas that dominates our carnivore and low carb conversations, and that's the concept of regenerative agriculture. And I'm going to ask you a very basic question up front here. What role should the processed food companies and the big box retailers play in developing a better agricultural system and reclaiming it from the large food combines and the large agriculture companies, decentralizing it and bringing it back down to everyday people? What role should they play in that process? It's a question I have for you because I don't know the answer to that myself, and I'd like to get your input. But we now have word that a couple of the biggest players in processed food and food distribution are dumping a lot of money into regenerative agriculture. That's good news by itself, especially because the money is supposed to go for researching and developing better, more regenerative agricultural practices. That's not a bad thing. So we turn to a website called fooddive.com. It's a food industry news outlet, and they give us this headline for our story. General Mills and Walmart team up to accelerate regenerative agriculture. The companies look to advance sustainable farming practices on 600,000 acres of land, the amount the CPG giant relies on to source key ingredients for products sold at the retailer stores. General Mills is not Kellogg's, and that's a good thing. But General Mills is a company that sprouted up using essentially the same methods that Kellogg's did to compete with them. And Walmart, while having a surprising amount of ketogenic and low carb and organic food items in their stores, still are a very problematic retailer. But they are dumping a lot of their big resources into regenerative practices. And so that's not a bad thing per se. Now, what is regenerative agriculture? You could probably do a whole video on this. I tried to do one once and almost nobody watched it. So we're going to define it here as the process of restoring degraded soils using practices like adaptive grazing, no-till planting, no or limited use of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, etc., based on ecological principles. Now, the definition comes from noble.org. I didn't bother to look up what their ecological principles were, because that's a subject for another video. They are an environmental group, so take it with a grain of salt because they'll have some troubling assumptions otherwise. But that definition will work as a very bird's eye view, top-down definition for this purpose. And the takeaway from the article from Food Dive is this. General Mills will work with Walmart to accelerate the adoption of regenerative agriculture across 600,000 acres of land by 2030, the company said Tuesday. The collaboration will fund projects that seek to advance more sustainable farming practices for wheat and other crops in 7 U.S. states, including Colorado, Kansas, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and South Dakota. Grants will be administered by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The 600,000 acreage target is roughly the amount of land General Mills relies on to source key ingredients for products sold through Walmart and Sam's Club stores. Sam's Club is owned by the same company that owns Walmart. It's the club store version of Walmart, basically. So there's two good things. There's a good thing and a bad thing about this. And the good is that it gives more funding for the development of sustainable regenerative farming practices. And dovetailing with that is another good thing. This is sort of a system endorsement of regenerative agriculture, at least a tacit endorsement. That's good because regenerative agriculture does challenge the food system status quo. It's not a controversial statement to say we can't keep dumping these nasty chemicals onto the land and expect to have no consequences. Now, there's a bad here from this, though. These crops and meats will be used for mostly ultra-processed foods. Well, crops, really, not meats. But we're talking about General Mills. They're not exactly known for putting fresh produce on the produce section of the store, okay? So we're talking about grains for cereal, mostly, and a few other General Mills products through their product subsidiaries. That's what we're talking about here. It's not, moving people away from a carbohydrate-heavy diet, but at the very least, it is helping develop better farming practices that will then trickle over to those other areas. And plus, it does help mainstream the entire conversation of regenerative agriculture. Because as I've covered here previously, months ago, there were people who are taking on regenerative agriculture, calling it essentially just industrial farming by another name, which is the opposite of true. But, when we're talking about the kind of people who want to push a plant-based diet on you and the ultra-processed foods that pretty much have to come with that to make it even remotely sustainable, the truth is not going to be on their side, and they won't care for it. Here's the takeaway quote from the article. Walmart has engaged some of its largest suppliers on regenerative agriculture products, announcing in July it would team with PepsiCo on a $120 million investment to support farmers who improve their soil and water quality. The retail giant has also embarked on sustainability initiatives within its own supply chain, working with ranchers to improve grazing methods and implementing regenerative practices for nearly 10,000 acres in support of Walmart's private label long grain rice. The collaboration with General Mills will fund organizations that work to accelerate regenerative agriculture by providing farmers with educational resources and technical assistance. General Mills said the partnership puts it on the path to exceed its goal of advancing the adoption of regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres by 2030. End quote. So on the Walmart side, you see that they have been using this for a lot of their meat. So if you buy your beef from Walmart, you can feel a little bit better about doing so, that it's not all going to be regenerative, but some of it is going to be, and that's not a bad thing. They don't say explicitly what label, but probably their market side grass-fed, grain-finished beef is probably going to be the regenerative stuff, if I had to guess. The last time I looked at one of those packages, though, it was not labeled as such. But keep checking and reading your packaging labels in the meat department anywhere you go. But I'm curious what you think about this. Is this a good thing? Again, I'll bring up that question I asked at the beginning. What role do these big companies play? Should we be happy that a company that still peddles nasty stuff, like General Mills, is putting money into regenerative agriculture? Should we be hoping that General Mills will somehow move over to making at least lower carb things that they make? Or does the world we should be working for in terms of nutrition not include a place for General Mills? It's a hard question. I'm curious what you have to say on this. Is this a good thing? I can't see a downside to Walmart getting into this. They are one of, if not the biggest grocery store in the country, meaning probably in the world. So it's not a bad thing for them, especially since they're actually helping on the ranching side of things to do this. But what about for General Mills and PepsiCo? Some of you, I'm sure, still drink diet soda. What do you think? Is it good that PepsiCo's also getting involved in this with the production, I'm sure, of their sugar sources through more regenerative means? Let me know what you have to say in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps too. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore. Thanks for tuning in.